I am less than thrilled to profess that I am one of over 200 million people who subscribe to the premium service of God King Bezos' money machine, which I will refuse to name. Now, I namely pay the VIG because it lets me get blackout drunk, forget that I ordered a canoe, and have it show up at my door the next day. But another reason is that you actually get tons of free games from it. A lot of gaming perks in general, actually. You no doubt know about this if you've ever watched someone stream on Twitch and have them beg you to part with your free sub. For years, at this point, I have convinced myself that eventually, I will be given a free game from this service that I will make a video about, as if to validate my investment. For what it's worth, they have actually given out some good stuff over the years. They had a bunch of SNK games on offer at one point, which I really want to make a video about because both SNK and their system, the Neo Geo, occupy a very interesting place in gaming history and lore, but that is for another time. Instead, the game that I loved enough to finally find some validation for my money spent is none other than Colt Canyon. A roguelike developed by Retrific and published by Head Up in 2020, Colt Canyon sees you taking on the role of a western drifter who's tasked with rescuing their partner in crime after they're kidnapped by a group of bandits out of a clear blue sky. Doing so means traversing the waste and getting up to a whole bunch of western nonsense, meaning getting into more than a few shootouts and tossing dynamite around like it's cash at a strip joint. Every once in a while, there will be a game that gets my interest in a way that I sincerely don't expect, and Colt Canyon is the most recent example of that. This game is flatly outstanding. I'm not even going to bother trying to bury the lead here, because if the fact that I played it for about 8 hours in 2 days after initially downloading it is any indication, I liked it. What I really think did it for me in this case was the way that Colt Canyon managed to incorporate the randomness and replayability aspects that one would expect from any good roguelike, while still demanding a high degree of skill on the part of the player. Like, Colt Canyon could be loosely described as a bullet hell. It certainly feels like one when you find yourself in a tough combat situation, that's for sure, but unlike a lot of others of its ilk, it never really reaches the point where it feels like it starts playing itself, where you've become so strong as you progress with the upgrades and items you unlock that it just becomes an exhibition in excess. Rather, it gives the player the tools required to see the goal of rescuing your partner through, but still puts the onus on the player to actually get it done. No matter what weapons you have or what goodies you've acquired, you've got to be on your toes and hot to trot as you deal with enemies, traps, and the bosses in each level. Your aim has got to be true, and you've got to be able to bob and weave like a son of a gun, or you're gonna die. And you will die a lot. I think the fact that there is a lot put onto the players helped by the fact that the gameplay itself is fairly simplistic. You travel through each level, shoot the bad guys, try not to get shot back by utilizing your roguelike patented dodge roll, save other prisoners who have been taken captive by the bandits, and rinse and repeat over the course of 3 individually sectioned levels until you reach the final boss. It's just addictingly fun. The way that it forces you to think on your feet when you get yourself in over your head and find a lot more enemies than you were expecting, or even just exploring the randomly generated levels, is just a treat. It actually has a feel very similar to that of Hotline Miami, between the way that the camera moves, how you can only see so much of the level at one moment, and the way that you can, and are expected to, move and shoot effectively at the same time. I mean, it's basically the style of gameplay found in Hotline Miami. Undoubtedly a touch slower, but is different and changes every time due to the random level and item generation and placement. What isn't to love about that? Rescuing the aforementioned prisoners is where you get your upgrades, which can do things such as make your weapons stronger, increase your health or movement skills, and even grant you some companions that will follow you around and help you fight. What I like most about a lot of these upgrades is the way that they are unquestionably helpful. You certainly want these bonuses to help you get through the game, but they aren't particularly defining or even necessary. It's nice to be able to reload faster or have some extra health, sure, but you aren't going to be gutted or unable to move forward if you don't have them. This does 2 things. Namely, 1, it means you've still got to have the skills to cut it, as I said earlier, and probably more importantly, it means you're never really beholden to any skill or upgrade you might need for one reason or another. You can always pivot and change things around depending on how your run is going, what weapons you're currently equipped with or find throughout the levels, and just to suit your own style of preferred gameplay. There are plenty of options that pertain to specifics, such as making melee weapons stronger or letting your bullets more adequately pierce through walls, but also a ton of more general bonuses, meaning you're rarely, if ever, going to be presented with 5 choices that you hate. I can hardly describe how outstanding a feeling this is. To just be able to let it ride with whatever upgrade you get means you never have to restart because you can't complete your build or something like that, nor do you ever really feel like you get forced into playing a way you don't want to. The game doesn't need to let you re-roll your choices or banish a certain option so that you never see it again, because they just flatly aren't that impactful. They're helpful enough that you care about them, but not so impactful that they start dictating your game. Considering player input is so important here, it's a good thing that there are so many ways that you can play. I prefer smaller weapons and shotguns, whereas you might lean towards stealth and melee weapons to get things done. There are over 100 different weapons to find and use, and as you play through the game, you also unlock an assortment of characters who each have their own base stats that incline them more towards one style of gameplay over another. And guess what? You'd best be comfortable with what you're doing, because after you scratch and claw your way through the wilderness to rescue your partner, you've got to turn your ass right back around and get them to safety, wading back through your wake of destruction to face a whole new crew of enemies. It hits you with the fake out, and it's awesome, and it totally got me the first time I reached that point. A really underrated aspect of this experience is probably how many anti-frustration features are crammed into it. It has everything you would expect from a roguelike. Permadeath, stat and time trackers, endless modes, and basically every other nut and bolt you would want to see from the genre. By the same token, you also have the choice as the player to, say, turn off permadeath if you wish. The time aspects are almost entirely for your own vanity, meaning you're free to take your time through each level should you so choose. The game will start to spawn wolves into levels you've been hanging out in for too long, but honestly, they're pretty easily dealt with themselves. Oh, and you can just disable them too, if you want, and also you can go back and forth between each level in case you forget things, and the game even encourages you to do so. You can also save and come back later, which is a feature I didn't realize I would love as much as I do, but is one that I now firmly believe every roguelike should have. The game doesn't hold back pertinent information either. Enemies that are either searching for you or preparing to attack will have the appropriate markers displayed above their heads, and traps and hazards are both painted in a clear red as to denote their presence. Both of those things can and do get lost in the madness of combat, don't doubt it, but if you do your due diligence and keep your wits about you, then you should never accidentally walk into a trap, for instance. It's almost like the game is confident enough in itself to tell you all of this, and in turn, is just made a dream to play because of it. Never, in the time that I played at least, did I ever feel like I died or got screwed over because of something the game either didn't tell me or that I had no way of knowing. All of this great gameplay is backed up by an outstanding presentation. I actually found the pixel art incredibly appealing. It's selective in its use of color, but not so much so in a way that it hinders the gameplay. Enemies stand out against the backdrop plenty fine, and there is enough detail in the landscapes that they're enjoyable to take in. The natural cool factor that comes with nearly any Western theming plays nicely with the minimalistic style as well. The music that accompanies it is fantastic to boot. The game utilizes what I can only think to describe as the drop in and out system for its tracks. When you're just waltzing around, it's chill and sparse, and then seamlessly transitions into bombastic and intense the second you enter into combat proper, only to fade back out just as seamlessly once you've finished. It gives a sense that the tracks are fluid, almost one and the same, in the way that they just masterfully weave together in that sense. If there's anything that I would have liked to have seen a bit more out of this presentation, it would be some sort of story notes. I'm not looking for Citizen Kane, obviously, and it shouldn't be that, but a few nuggets to fill in some context here and there probably would have done some good. Like, why did bandits decide to randomly steal my partner? Why am I fighting a giant bear as the second boss? Why the hell are there traitors that are willing to populate these literal war zones? Like, the developers probably could have just Dark Souls'd it. Just include some vague statements that are entirely open to interpretation and just let us run wild with it. Also, in a more literal sense, Colt Canyon does utilize a lot of post-processing effects. This isn't a big deal if you like those graphical features, but I will be a bloom and depth of field hater until the day I die, so I actually wound up playing the game on the lowest graphical settings because it was the only way I could find to turn them off. There are also some aspects of the gameplay that aren't necessarily bad, but they just feel a bit weird. You can find horses throughout each and every level, for instance, that can be ridden to let you more quickly navigate each area. The reality is, though, that shooting from them is really wonky and difficult, they need to be kept alive, and probably most damningly, the levels themselves are not long enough that they're actually needed. You'll get through them just fine on foot. Unless you're trying to speedrun, which is valid for what it's worth, there isn't any real reason to use them. You also have the option to sneak attack enemies that are unaware of your presence, namely by rolling towards them and initiating a melee attack, dealing increased damage in the process. The problem with this is that sometimes it'll feel like you're 15 miles away and the attack will successfully go off, and other times you'll be right next to them and it won't. It's a neat idea for sure, but it doesn't quite feel like it's implemented as finely as it should be. Regardless of those incredibly small quibbles, I'm not sure there is a better feeling than this in gaming. It doesn't get any better than being blown away by a game that you don't have any real expectations of going into. I can safely say that Colt Canyon is my favorite roguelike that I've played recently. I can't wait to play more of it, and my goodness, if it isn't far too good to be given away for free, then I don't know what is.